Hi, Carolyn Dube here. I'm playing with Cecilia Swatton's Flowers V2 stencil from Stencil Girl. This is part 2. If you missed part 1, the link is down below in the description. You can see here that I am punching the paper. I wanted some diamonds. I could easily cut the diamonds with scissors. I just had a punch, so I chose to go that way. I am randomly punching out of this pattern, so I'm going to pick up bits of the color. I'll put it here against the white so you can get an idea of how different it looks when it's cut into that shape. Really has a completely different look from when it was a complete piece of paper. I do want some more diamonds for the pattern that I'm going to make, so I'm going to pick another spot, and you know what? That actually looks like it could be an art journal element, so I'm going to cut that off. I really like how that looks, and I'm going to save that to use in an art journal later. But all I'm going to do is just punch some more. I am punching randomly, picking up whatever colors are there, not thinking about that part of it. I'm really thinking about the shapes. And so again, here you can see what they look like against a solid white background, and again, how different they look when it is punched compared to the big piece. So I decided I wanted to make a tag with the diamond shapes that I've punched out, and I want to create a background for this that matches in some way the diamonds that I already have. So I decided to pick 2 colors of acrylic paint that went with the diamonds. So I went with the hot pink and the orange. And I am just gonna do a sloppy paint job here and put the pink paint right on the tag. Clearly I am not painting carefully here. So it's nice and juicy and shiny wet paint, and I'm gonna go directly into the orange, and I'm gonna put the stencil down right on the wet paint. So this is a wet on wet technique. What I'm doing is trying to make a background with a little something extra to it than if I had just painted it with pink paint. So I'm going to put it down on the other side. Again, very forgiving pattern, so lining it up is not really a big deal. And you can see what it looks like. It's got a little bit of texture, and I've got 2 colors happening there to give me a background that I can then put my diamonds on. Tag's completely dry now, and now I'm going to arrange the diamonds in a pattern that makes me happy. Once I've got them in a way that makes me happy, then I'm going to start cutting out the title for my tag, which is Creativity Takes Courage, that I typed up on an old vintage typewriter. Now keep in mind, nothing's glued down yet, so some of it may change, may not turn out exactly the way I'm thinking right now, but at least I've got an idea of where to go. But it's still not quite looking right to me. The background is too bright for me, so I'm going to need to make a change. I need to dull that background down. It really needs to fade back a little bit more for me. So out comes the gesso. Gesso I know I can water down, and I've got all that great texture that was on the 2 colors of paint. So that's what I'm actually going to play with now, is trying to get some of that texture to show up. So I'm going to use a catalyst blade tool to kind of scrape across it, and now bits of that texture are starting to show up, but I've used a lot of gesso. But never fear, because gesso, while it's still wet, gets some water on it, and things can start to, actually I had to dip it in the water that time, and now I can start pulling some of it up. Some of it's still going to catch within the texture of the other paint, and some of it will be coming up. So this sort of pushes back that orange and the pink, so it's not as bright. And I'm going to keep fiddling with this until I'm happy. So now what I'm going to do is add a little bit of rubber stamping to this. This one is by Art Gone Wild. And as I stamped this with the archival ink, I actually made an oops with it, where the stamp kind of wiggled on me, but by the time I'm done, it's not even going to be noticeable. So, needed to give the words a little more something, so I gave them those little tails so that they look a little more interesting. And then it's time to commit and start gluing this thing down. I'm just using good old tacky glue because it's in a bottle that I can squeeze out. I could use gel medium. I could use just about any kind of glue will work for this that works with paper. So the parts that are hanging over the edge, and I love it when a pattern hangs off the edge, are really easy to cut off after I've glued it down. Those triangles that I've glued down, that I'm cutting off, actually can be used again on the tag if it fits with the pattern, or they can be saved for something else. And nah, those didn't make me happy on this one, so I'll save those for something else. So now I want to give it some kind of frame, and I've turned to my Stabilo pencil for this. Stabilo's great because it writes over anything, including slick surfaces like acrylic paint, and I'm going to start out by just giving it a light line. I am not going to be terribly happy with just the light line. I've got such bright, strong black from the stencil pattern that I need something to sort of balance that out. So I'm going to keep messing with this until I feel like I've got that balance that I want. One of the best things to do with a Stabilo pencil is to add a little bit of water to it, and that really darkens it up. And so now I'm starting to get that balance that I wanted. So I've got this great little girl that I cut out from Hidden Vintage Studios over at DeviantScrap.com, but her colors don't completely match as well as I'd like. So what I'm going to do is use some pan pastels, and I'm just going to color in her collar gently. And I did go a little bit over where I was planning on going, but never fear, I'm just going to grab a Q-tip to use it kind of like an eraser and sort of clean it up a little bit. I'm also going to give a little bit of color to the edge of the purple dress, just to give it a slight hint of the green so it looks like it belongs, like it was meant to be there. And then I'm going to blend it in with that Q-tip. It's a little thing, it's not that big a deal, but it makes me happier and makes me feel like she was meant to be on that page color-wise. So now it's time to see if the placement's right on the tag for me, and I think I'm going to like her right about there. So the next thing, I've got all these white edges where I didn't cut perfectly. Don't worry about those, I'll take care of those a little bit later. So what I'm going to do now is grab some gel medium. I am going to use a soft gel medium, but the kicker here is this girl is an inkjet printout. So if she gets wet, the inks are going to run. So as I'm putting this gel medium on, I'm doing it very carefully just to keep it on the back of her, because if I get it on the front, I am likely to smear the inks. So just be aware of that if you're using inkjet printouts. So I've got her about where I want her, and then I just have to push her down. Again, being very careful not to get the top of her wet so that none of the ink smears or runs. So I've brought out my Stabilo pencil yet again, and what I'm going to do is kind of go around the edges of her and add a little bit of sketchiness to her. It's also going to cover up any of those white parts on the paper where I didn't cut as precisely as I could have. I'm not really a fan of having to do everything super precisely, so I like to cover things up with things like the Stabilo pencil. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an Energel pen by Pentel from the office store, and I'm really lightly just giving a little bit of a black line to the edges of the banners that have the words on it, just because as they were solid white sitting there, it was just solid white and it didn't look like it belonged, so it needed some kind of scribbly something on it. So now it's your turn to play. Grab a stencil and have some fun. You can find more ideas on how to use stencils at StencilGirlTalk.com.